Chapter 6, Critical Conditioning. All of a sudden it felt like all my hobbies and interests were working against me. It didn't matter what I was invested in, nothing I enjoyed was going to benefit my future and I needed to focus on school. After my fight with Brantley, I wasn't going to be graduating when I normally would have. I was a straight A student, but I did slack off a little bit from time to time. I had gone from almost skipping a grade to being held behind due to that one mistake. I didn't start going to school on my own until I started high school either. That was only because I started working my first real job that summer. My family went to the local pool a lot when I was a kid, so I became a lifeguard after school had finished that year. I worked a few odd jobs before that too. Those I usually received from my parents. Their friends are my neighbors on the side. The tasks they appointed me with weren't too demanding. I was only a child after all. I wasn't even the legal age when I started. My parents just considered them to be chores. If they weren't referred to as chores, then I guess you could say they were babysitting me. Either that or I was working off a well-deserved punishment. Mom used to make me tend the desk at the dojo when I wasn't there training. She even had me sweep and mop the place whenever the custodian didn't make it. Whenever she was upset with me or too busy, I would help out my father by organizing papers in his office around the station too. That's actually where I saw Grace a lot of the time, so I didn't mind accompanying my father to work at all. I worked on and off with my parents for a few years before becoming a lifeguard. I only did that for a couple of summers, but during that time, I had 4 rescues. Each pertained to a child drowning or becoming too stressed to swim in the water. I even had to apply CPR to a few of them, and their parents were always very appreciative of my heroism. Even the adult that I saved rewarded me greatly one day. He made such a big deal about it that I made the news. The gentleman had cramped up after jumping off the diving board in the deep end of the swimming pool. He went under and he didn't return to the surface for at least a minute, which was longer than usual. I knew this because I had seen him at the pool several times before that. He was a frequent flyer and I knew him to be an excellent swimmer. That's why I knew he was in danger when he didn't come up for air. With no time to think, I had to react quickly. I dove off the life chair in what most would call a swan dive, entering the lukewarm water fingertips first. I swam underwater with my eyes open and burning from the chlorine as I looked around for the swimmer. Once I located him, I grabbed the man by the waist and I brought him up for air. After bystanders helped me get him out of the water, everyone stepped aside. They awaited in suspense as I tended to the diver who wasn't breathing. I applied CPR immediately and less than a minute later, the gentleman spit out the water that was trapped inside his lungs. He regained consciousness and his fluttered eyes opened. They started to leak down the side of his face as I received a round of applause from those overlooking the rescue. I was still in the moment and I was concerned about the swimmer, so all the clapping sounded muffled to me. It was as if I were still underwater trying to get a hold of him before time ran out. It wasn't until the survivor got on his feet and gave me a hug as everyone continued to clap and congratulate me. Aside from the fact that I was just doing my job, I had received accommodation for that rescue. I had obtained the silver life-saving medal from the mayor of the town and my act of heroism made the news. I got to speak to a reporter named Louis Scott who was just getting his feet wet and covered the entire story at the pool. I continued as an active lifeguard until I was a senior in high school. Summers were over and I became too busy with my schoolwork. I couldn't maintain my good grades with all my other after-school activities I took on at the time. I had to slow down and really focus on choosing a college, so I had to let a lot of things go. Leading up to my senior year, Mom and I looked at schools every other weekend. For months, we took quite a few tours of colleges nearby, but I wanted to attend John Jay, mainly because it was in the city and both my father and Grace worked in the area. I didn't see either of them as much as I liked to, and that would have allowed me to do so. On another note, I also considered Rutgers University. It was in New Jersey and the campus was pretty close to home. They were both known to have a good program for criminal forensics, which I was still interested in due to my father's profession. During my senior year, everything was going pretty well. I kept up my grades and I was really excited that I would be going to a college close to home. My parents were even more thrilled about that than I was. I really wanted to stay close to home since I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do with my life. I didn't know what I wanted to study at that point either. I figured I would study forensic psychology or something related to criminology because I was quite familiar with the subject. I thought about studying law after everything I learned from my dad. However, becoming a lawyer required a lot more schooling and I didn't like that. I just loved the loopholes in the system. The same ones both the prosecutors and the defense would use to their advantage on television. Whenever my parents and I watched TV shows that dealt with law and order, I was intrigued. I also felt like I was able to solve the cases a lot sooner than either of my parents. They said I was a critical thinker. I wasn't sure what that meant, so they made me look it up. It turns out that several different definitions actually exist. Each one includes a rational, skeptical, and unbiased analysis of factual evidence. In other words, I could think outside of the box, create a new box with those thoughts, and then think outside of that box too. My thought process followed the four fundamentals, such as analysis, interpretation, presentation, and evaluation, which included identifying the problem, doing your own research, and determining what data is relevant. Afterwards, you have to ask questions, identify possible solutions, and then choose the best one and present it. Finally, you have to analyze your decision and apply the same steps to your own decision without bias. Due to technology, our skills in critical thinking and analysis have declined drastically. While our visual skills have improved, teachers haven't been able to find the time to incorporate critical thinking into their daily curriculum. For example, many kids my age can't write in cursive, but they can type up JavaScript. I, on the other hand, learned how to think this way on my own, simply by gathering information from different sources, listening to my parents when they spoke, and asking other adults a lot of questions. Talking to my parents and others around them allowed me to mature faster, simply by gaining access to information most children wouldn't be privy to at my age. Similar to the way I picked up parkour, I tried to talk my mom into letting me teach parkour at the gym, but it wasn't popular enough at the time, nor did I have enough experience to be a trainer myself. I tried showing off around town, hoping to bring more applicants to the gym, but not enough people were interested. That's when I realized I had wasted a lot of time. Everything I had been interested in suddenly became irrelevant. It felt like I completely wasted my high school years doing things that would not benefit me or my future. I fell behind in martial arts. I didn't get a scholarship for any of the sports I participated in. I was no longer an honor roll student, and parkour wasn't really a practice I could live off of. I was out of options and I had no idea what to do. That was until the acceptance letters from college came and Mom opened them. It turns out, I had several options. The main ones were John Jay and Rutgers University. We got exactly what we wanted, and she didn't tell me for weeks. She didn't tell me because she didn't want me slacking off. She figured I wouldn't remain as focused if I knew I had been accepted before the year was out. As usual, she was right. That didn't stop Mom from bragging about me to her friends. She was always proud of my accomplishments. Both of my parents were still very ecstatic. Mom especially. The American dream that she had worked so hard to achieve had come true. My mother was able to study, learn, work, run a business, become a homeowner, and above all else, raise a family. She had gotten married, had a child, and worked hard enough to put him through college in the process. There wasn't much else she could ask for, besides her son's wedding and grandchildren. Even though my parents were happy, I was still disturbed. I didn't know what I was going to do after graduation because I wasn't entirely sure I wanted to go to school. I still felt an enormous amount of pressure, and I didn't want to let my parents down. Not after they worked so hard to get me as far as they did. I started to write down all my thoughts in a journal, and whenever I would read it over, I'd think of becoming a writer too. One of my favorite teachers always said I had a knack for it. Her name was Ms. Donato. She said I had a rather unique vision and I was very prone to detail. I didn't see what she saw, but I never had a problem with writing anyway. It was reading that was the issue for me. I still haven't read my father's book, and that's one that I'm actually anxious to read. So, I thought about getting into writing. I just never knew what I would write about. Graduation was slowly approaching, and everyone seemed to know what they were going to do after school. Everybody besides me. I started to become more stressed out with school than I already was. There were moments where I couldn't even write. It got bad that I began meditating at home when I couldn't think straight. None of this seemed to help guide me down the path I needed to go, and I didn't want to waste money for no reason. I never felt like school taught me what would be needed in the real world. I always felt like I learned more from working with my parents and interacting with people. Aside from reading, writing, and math, nothing really seemed to be needed. But I felt that way about most of my hobbies too, not just school. I was completely lost, and I didn't know what I was going to do once the year ended. That's when I understood why some schools weren't free for all. My senior year was coming closer to an end and I was running out of time. I planned to take the summer off because not much had changed. I actually started to train more often because I found myself to be alone and more stressed out than usual. I even practiced parkour by myself because I didn't have to study and everyone else seemed to be busy. However, that didn't last too long because my mother wouldn't let me take any more time off than I usually did between classes. I ultimately landed on criminology because I didn't have time to think about it anymore. My first semester of college was going to start in the fall and I would be close to home. Therefore, I figured that would be best. If I wanted to, I could move into a dorm on campus or even a residential community, and my family would still be able to spend the holidays together like we always have. I would also be able to come and go from home as I pleased. It was perfect. Little did I know none of that was going to matter. I was just about finished with my senior when the pandemic hit. A virus had spread and infected everybody worldwide. Businesses were closing, schools were shutting down, and even churches were forced to close their doors to the public. We were all forced to remain inside as the pathogen spread. My parents thought it would be best if I stayed home too. They didn't care about school anymore. My health and well-being became a number one priority. Everyone's lives had been turned upside down, and it became a moment in time that no one would forget. The elderly became sick and the terminally ill began dying at an alarming rate. No one knew what it was or where it came from. Many suspected that it started in March of that year, but a lot of the information seemed to change every day. Nothing made sense. Even the origin of the virus wasn't certain, so the stories surrounding it all had confused the vast majority of the public. Oddly enough, I found myself to be pretty sick a lot earlier than March. I actually had what my parents suspected was the flu in December. I had never been that sick before. Not that I could recall anyway. My parents didn't seem to think so either. They both assumed it was the flu because they both have had something similar in the past. It was also that time of year, so they didn't think it was anything serious. Surprisingly, that was the only time I had ever been under the weather. I never called out of school sick or anything like that before. Come to think about it, that was the only time I think I've ever seen my parents sick as well. My grandmother, May, was the first person I knew that had come down with the virus after it made the news. She was already sick with cancer, and the disease seemed to speed up the time she had left. That led my family to think what we had in December might have been different after all. When Grammy May got sick, the hospitals were overcrowded in the area. We were told they couldn't admit her, and she was forced into a senior citizen home to quarantine. They were taking in patients while the hospitals were short-staffed, short on beds and ventilators. I still find it ironic how she died shortly after she was admitted into that living facility. Without a shadow of a doubt, my grandmother would have been better off surrounded by her loved ones. I don't care what anyone has to say about that. My mother was really torn up. She was beyond sad, broken, and I had never seen her like that before. She cried and cried and then cried some more. With all her training and with all her strength, she was helpless. There was nothing Mom could do to help my grandmother as she passed away. She was not allowed to hold her mother's hand or comfort her in any way, not with masks, gloves, or any protective gear that was required. We were stacked too. Thanks to my father's readiness and the need to have nice things, we had the coolest equipment. My masks fit great and I didn't mind them at all. Granted, they were more for show than protection since we all had the virus already. Still, the doctors refused. They could come close enough to tell us we were in danger, yet we weren't allowed to be close to family. The doctors kept telling us that Grandma was too sick to be moved. She wasn't breathing on her own, and they insisted that she needed to be on a ventilator. It was all hearsay to us because we couldn't see her. So, we couldn't confirm or deny her condition. Everything happened so fast. None of the authorities had an explanation as to why they were doing what they were doing. They kept saying they were just following orders and that this was for our own good. Not once did they say it was for my grandmother's well-being. Not once. I couldn't help but feel like it was intentional given the way everything was handled. It wasn't until I heard the sounds of someone screaming bloody murder when I was up in my bedroom one night. I haven't heard screams like this since I was a kid. They damn near shook the house as they screeched and echoed through all floors of the once peaceful home. I crept out of my bedroom knowing it wasn't coming from my parents' room and tippy-toed over to the edge of the staircase. I heard a loud crash which could only be described as the sound of glass breaking. When I looked over the banister, all that I saw was my mother kneeling on the kitchen floor. She reminded me of how my father used to get during his nightmares. I raced down the stairs to see if I could help, and there she was, on the kitchen tiles with a bowl of noodles smashed against the wall. "Grammy's gone and dinner's ruined," she said, with her knee soaked in the puddle of tears that surrounded her.